Some secrets die with you, unless you're Arthur Grayson. On October 17th, 2024, an old man took his last breath in a hospice bed and confessed to murders no one knew he'd committed. But here's the catch: he didn't just name his victims. He said they'd never be found because his work wasn't finished. This is his story. Arthur Grayson was 82 years old, a retired mechanic from a small town in Ohio. To his neighbors, he was a quiet widower, gruff, solitary, but harmless. Cancer had eaten away at him for months, and by the fall of 2024, he was just another patient fading into the sterile white walls of Willow Creek Hospice. No one expected anything extraordinary from him. Not until the night nurse, Sarah Carter, walked past his room and heard something that stopped her cold. It was late, around 2 a.m., and the hospice was silent, save for the hum of machines. Sarah was finishing her rounds when she caught Arthur muttering in his sleep, "For down, 2 to go." She froze. His voice was low, raspy, but deliberate, like he was counting something. She chalked it up to delirium. Morphine does strange things to a dying mind. But the next morning, Arthur was awake, his eyes sharp despite the pallor of death creeping in. He grabbed Sarah's wrist with a strength that didn't match his frail frame and said, "I need to tell someone before I go. I killed them. 4 women. And I buried them where the crows won't sing." Sarah's stomach dropped. This wasn't confusion. This was a confession, cold, clear, and calculated. She fumbled for her phone, hit record, and let him talk. For 20 minutes, Arthur laid it bare. For names spilled from his cracked lips: Lisa Monroe, taken in 1992. Carla Evans, 1998. Jenna Hart, 2005. Marie Todd, 2013. Young women, all strangers to him, snatched from quiet roads or empty parking lots. He described their clothes: Lisa's blue scarf, Carla's denim jacket. He recalled their screams, their pleas. And he pinpointed their graves: shallow pits in places he called too wild for God to care. Then came the twist that made Sarah's blood run cold. Arthur leaned closer, his breath rattling, and whispered, "2 more are waiting. I planned it. It's ready." 10 minutes later, his heart monitor flatlined. He was gone, but his words lingered, heavy and haunting. Sarah took the recording to the police that same day. She expected action, urgency. Instead, she got skepticism. The detective she spoke to, a tired man named Hargrove, leaned back in his chair and sighed. "People confess to crazy things when they're dying," he said. "No missing persons match those names perfectly. No bodies, no evidence, just an old man's story." Sarah pushed back. She'd heard the certainty in Arthur's voice, the details no delirious mind could invent. But without concrete proof, the police filed it away as a curiosity and sent her home. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the tape, Arthur's gravelly tone looping in her head. She was alone in her apartment, the recording echoing through her headphones, when something jolted her upright. Her car wouldn't start earlier. She'd left it in the hospice lot after her shift. She'd walked home, too shaken to care. But now, standing at her window, she heard it, a low whistle drifting from the trees across the street. The same tune Arthur had hummed on the tape, faint and deliberate. She yanked the curtains shut, her heart pounding. Was it her imagination? Or had Arthur left something behind, something that wasn't finished? Sarah couldn't let it go. Arthur's confession wasn't just a story. It was a warning, and she felt it in her bones. She needed answers, proof that those women existed, that their families could find peace. So she called the one person she knew who might help: Daniel Pierce, a local journalist with a reputation for chasing cold cases. Daniel was skeptical too at first. A deathbed confession with no bodies, he said over coffee the next morning. Sounds like a ghost story. But Sarah played him the tape, and by the time Arthur's voice faded out, Daniel was in. They started digging into Arthur's life, tax records, property deeds, anything that might point to those wild places he'd mentioned. Arthur had lived simply, a small house in town, a pension, no criminal record. But then Daniel found it, a deed from 1985 for a cabin 40 miles north, deep in the Hocking Hills forest. No one had seen Arthur there in years, but it fit his description perfectly, remote, untamed, forgotten. They drove out at dawn the next day, the forest swallowing their car as the road turned to gravel. The cabin was a wreck, rotted wood, broken windows, the air thick with mildew. Inside it looked abandoned, a rusted stove, a moth-eaten chair. But Sarah's eyes caught something, a rug in the corner, slightly askew. She pulled it back, revealing a trapdoor bolted shut. Daniel grabbed a crowbar from his truck and pried it open. A ladder descended into a dirt cellar, damp and cold. They climbed down, their flashlight beams cutting through the dark. No bodies waited below, but what they found was worse. Tucked against the wall was a wooden box, and inside were Polaroids, 4 of them. Each showed a woman, bound and gagged, their faces twisted in terror. Dates were scrawled on the back: 1992, 1998, 2005, 2013. Lisa, Carla, Jenna, Marie. Arthur hadn't lied. These were his trophies, proof of his crimes. But the cellar held more secrets. The walls were scratched with tally marks, dozens of them, far more than 4. And in the box, beneath the photos, was a hand-drawn map. 6 red X's marked it, for clustered near the cabin, 2 farther out, the ink still fresh, glistening in the light. Sarah's hands shook as she held the map. 2 more are waiting, Arthur had said. Daniel pulled out his phone, checking local news. 2 women had gone missing that week. Anna Blake, 24, last seen near Route 33, and Kelly Ruiz, 31, vanished from a gas station 10 miles away. The timing was too perfect, the locations too close. Sarah's voice trembled. He couldn't have done this. He was dying. Daniel nodded, his face grim. Someone else did. They called the police from the cabin, but as they climbed out of the cellar, the trapdoor slammed shut behind them. The air shifted, thicker, heavier. Footsteps creaked upstairs. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm, whispering, "We're not alone." They bolted up the ladder, hearts racing, and scanned the cabin. Empty. But then they heard it, a faint scratching from the closet. Daniel yanked the door open, revealing a handheld tape recorder on the shelf, playing on a loop. Arthur's voice whistled that eerie tune, slow and deliberate. Someone had been here, someone who wanted them to find this. Panic set in. Sarah and Daniel stumbled out of the cabin, the whistle still ringing in their ears. Daniel's truck was useless, its tires slashed, fresh footprints trailing into the woods. "We've got to follow them," Daniel said, his voice tight. Sarah begged him to wait for the police, but he was already moving, disappearing into the trees. 10 minutes later, he staggered back, his face white as ash. "There's a grave," he choked out. "Fresh. And a shoe red like Anna Blake's." The police arrived an hour later, cordoning off the cabin and digging where Daniel pointed. They found Anna's body, shallowly buried, wrists still bound, her death hours old. Kelly Ruiz was still missing. But the math didn't add up. Arthur had been bedridden for months, too weak to lift a spoon, let alone a shovel. This wasn't his kill. Someone else was finishing what he'd started. Sarah replayed the confession tape that night, hunched over her laptop, searching for clues. She'd missed it before, Arthur's voice, faint beneath the hum of the hospice machines. "I taught him well. My shadow's sharper than me. A partner. A protégé." The police searched the cabin again and found a hidden compartment in the toolbox, a letter, unsealed, addressed to my boy. It read, "You know where the last one goes. Make it clean. Make me proud." The pieces snapped together. Arthur hadn't just confessed, he'd passed the torch. But who was my boy? Sarah barely slept, her mind racing. Then, at 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Kelly says hi." Attached was a photo, a woman tied up, gagged, her eyes wide with fear. Kelly Ruiz. Alive for now. Sarah called the police, her hands shaking as she forwarded the message. They traced the text to a burner phone pinging a tower near Route 33. By sunrise, a search team found Kelly in an abandoned barn, barely conscious, her wrists raw from ropes. She described her captor, a man in his 40s, wiry, with cold eyes and a whistle she'd never forget, Arthur's tune. He'd slipped away before the cops closed in, vanishing into the dawn. The police identified him days later, Jacob Grayson, Arthur's estranged son. He'd lived off-grid for years, a ghost with no records, fueled by a quiet rage and a twisted loyalty to his father. Arthur had killed 4 women, Lisa, Carla, Jenna, Marie. Their remains found near the cabin, right where the map promised. Jacob had taken Anna and Kelly, a tribute to his father's legacy. Kelly survived, but Jacob didn't. He's still out there, no trace, no digital footprint, just a promise in that letter. I'll keep going till the crows stop singing. Arthur's dead, his secrets buried with him, except for the ones Jacob carries. The case broke open old wounds, gave closure to 4 families, but left a shadow lingering. How many more graves are hidden in those wild places? How many more names are on Jacob's list? This isn't just a story of a killer's confession. It's a warning about the monsters we don't see, the ones who learn from the past and wait in the dark. If Jacob's still hunting, who's next? That's the question that keeps Sarah up at night, listening for that whistle in the wind. That's the end of this twisted true crime tale. Did it leave you unsettled? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Is Jacob still out there, planning his next move? Hit that like button if this story gripped you. Share it with your true crime friends who love a dark mystery. And subscribe for more cases that'll keep you on edge. We've got plenty more where this came from, stories of secrets, shadows, and the things that don't stay buried. Until next time, listen closely. You never know what's hiding in the silence.